come back home all for $1.
Ah, memories, I'll tell you. And here's one of our favorite people at TVA, Jan Jones, to tell us all about it.
Jan?
Thanks, guys. Well, here I am out in the field again, just like the old days. Only this time it's real special, because this is my old neighborhood, East 160th and Waterloo. And in the summertime, boy, were we lucky, because we could go up these streets, down through the back roads, across the Little League fields, and make it to Euclid Beach Park in minutes. In fact, an older boy in the neighborhood, Bill Stefancic, lived here on the street, and he ran the ride over the falls. And I have to admit, kind of had a crush on him. It was the best of times for good old Cleveland, Ohio, back in 1895 when Euclid Beach Park first opened its doors to the public. In the 50s, my grandpa worked at Cleveland Graphite Bronze, and every summer we'd look forward to the company family picnic there. I mean, what more could a local girl want than having this marvelous park just minutes from my house? There was the fun house, Laugh in the Dark, Over the Falls, the Thriller, the Bug, the rocket ship rides, a dance floor, and Laughing Sal, where all was fun and fun was everything. It was truly a park like no other. Those of you who are 22 years old or younger don't have any memories of Euclid Beach Park. You've just heard the stories passed down by family and friends, and maybe you've seen the arch here on Lakeshore Boulevard. So let me tell you what it was like for those of us who do remember. When we stepped underneath that arch, we were led into a wonderland.
Back in those days, a mother or father could tell a teenage girl, here's a dollar bill. Take a nickel, go across town, get out to Euclid Beach, spend 90 cents, and come back for the last nickel.
I guess you can say that David Humphrey Scott is a real Euclid Beach Park alumni, having grown up right there on the park and being related to its owners. Today, he serves as president of the 500-member-plus organization called the Euclid Beach Park Nuts, an association that keeps the spirit of the park alive and hopes to create a museum someday. It was with his help and many others that the 60-minute videotape, Euclid Beach Park is Closed for the Season, was recently produced. And with the loving support and devotion of his wife, Georgine, who serves as the vice president of the group, David still manages to put his life and soul into this bit of history that has touched so many.
I was brought into it quite early, because long before I was big enough to walk the length of the park, my dad used to put me on his shoulders, and he would do his internal ride inspections all during the day. Now, he was there from opening until closing. That's from noon to midnight, 7 days a week. And if I wanted to see him, I would go down to the park to see him, and then he would put me on his shoulders. And we would walk underground from one ride to the other, and he would show me, this is how warm this bearing should be. This oil cup should have this kind of oil. So much.
You knew everything as a kid.
Well, I was 12 when he died, and by that time I knew every safety regulation that was required for any particular ride.
Tell me about the Flying Turns.
Well, the Flying Turns was the tallest ride in Euclid Beach Park, 85 feet, but it had no major hill. It went up an 85-foot hill. It took 48 seconds for the complete ride. 23 seconds of that was downhill, and it ran free in an open barrel with no track. It operated by two laws, gravity and centrifugal force. And the heavier the car, the faster it would go. The faster it would go, the higher on the corner it would go.
If you talk to anybody who remembers the park, you'll hear them say the Flying Turns was their favorite ride. And I'm sure you recognize this man, New Center 8's Neil Zerker. Well, Neil, who grew up in Henrietta, Ohio, has fond memories of the park, too. When he was a young teenager, he'd visit his aunt in East Cleveland many times throughout the summer and always go to Euclid Beach Park. And although the Flying Turns was his favorite ride, too, how many of you remember this one?
One of the other favorite rides I had out there was the flying scooters. That was those things that had the big wing in the front that you control with your hand. You could make it go higher or lower as you went. And I got the most incredible thing 2 years ago. I was doing a story up in Indiana, at a park called Old Indiana, and they had a flying scooter up there. Guess where it came from? Euclid Beach. So I got to fly in it again.
The double roller coaster.
Yeah,
and you never knew, the racing coasters,
Yeah.
and you never knew which one would win.
Well, people bring that out. I could tell you 9 times out of 10 which car was going to win. And that was because all I had to do was look and see which car had the best-looking girl in it. Or the ride operator's girlfriend. It was a fix right from the beginning.
Do you think that any of our modern-day parks can capture what Euclid Beach had?
I don't think so. I don't think so, because really when you compare theme parks to the old-type family parks, you end up comparing apples and oranges. I have nothing against theme parks, but let's face it, I am a parent of 7 children and 21 grandchildren. Now, I can't afford to go to a theme park 7 times a year and pay close to $20 for my wife and I just to get in and walk around the park 7 times. Euclid Beach, on the other hand, no gate, no parking, and Grandpa could go fishing. Grandma could go up in the dance hall and watch dancing all afternoon. Mama could go over to the skating rink, listen to the Gavioli organ, and Dad could maybe go with the older children on the big rides or with the younger children over in Kittyland.
Like everybody else, I was sorry to see it close in '69. It's one of those things that I think it's a part of your growing up, and you hate to see something like that disappear forever. And so I guess I stood out there as a reporter watching them tear it down, and it was a sad moment, I got to tell you.
Where your train stops, where you get out, please. Watch your step as you're getting out, under the platform. Now, if people on the platform, you kindly stand behind the red line. And where your train stops before you get in. You 2 fellas in the front seat, will you please get out? The next 2 people get in. And those by the entrance, will you kindly move to the left or the right under the platform, please? Paul, leave some more up in on the platform, please.
Oh, man, what a sad sight. No, Jim Silver really did a great job on that. Well, I hope you old-timers got that on tape, because except for memories, that's about all we have left.
There are, however, 2 very nice books full of pictures and stories called Euclid Beach Park, Closed for the Season, and Euclid Beach Park, A Second Look. Check your local libraries. You'll enjoy them.
Okay, we'll be back one more time after this.
It's new. Coronary arteries, and over half the artery was more than 50% narrowed. 21-year-old kids. And furthermore, an airplane that overshot LaGuardia, autopsies were done on the passengers there, and again, about 70% of these innocent passengers in an airplane crash had coronary disease. And unfortunately, the first manifestation of this is sudden cardiac death. In addition to the morbidity and sickness, see, morbidity is when you're sick, and mortality is when you die. Not you, but somebody else. It's probable that 18 million people in the United States have all types of heart disease put together. The economic cost of heart disease can be measured in terms of what it costs to diagnose it, to treat it, to rehabilitate. Treatment includes such things, and I understand Floyd Loop was here a little while ago for bypass surgery, which is almost 254,000 people in the United States are undergoing bypass surgery. 300,000 are going through angioplasty, where a balloon is put in to dilate the blood vessels, plus the losses from work, etc. So it's enormous. The cost is estimated to be $25 billion. That's probably about 10 days cost in the Gulf. I'm not quite sure, maybe a little bit more. The total mortality of the armed forces in that terrible war, War 2.5 of Vietnam, there were 39,000 Americans died. In comparison, there were 5 million deaths due to coronary disease in the same period. Obviously, more money is spent on the military than is spent on fighting the battle against coronary disease. To look at it from a positive standpoint, the greatest accomplishment that's taken place as far as heart disease is concerned, we now understand what makes it occur. This is the first prerequisite to understand it. Hardening of the arteries is now known to be a disease which is not inevitable, does not always associate itself with aging. Many of us can get older and older and eventually old without having arteriosclerosis. It's predictable and it's preventable. What are these risk factors? And I'll briefly review them. These risk factors are factors found in people who are thought to be healthy, free of clinical disease, which are associated with a greater likelihood that they're going to develop the disease subsequently. What are they? The major risk factors are being a man. You know, they say it's a man's world in his wife's name. Being a man or a postmenopausal woman, when nature blows the whistle, the woman becomes more masculine. People who have increased amounts of fat in the blood, particularly in the form of cholesterol and the so-called bad cholesterol called LDL cholesterol, and triglycerides. Almost always that high fat is due to putting too much fat into your diet. The weight of a man's heart, it should be a woman's too, the weight of a man's heart is through the stomach. How true. 3 is high blood pressure, which is controllable. 4, the use of the poison called, and I always ask the audience, what is the most common poison used today? Cigarettes, and form of nicotine. And 5 is a sedentary, sloppy, indolent lifestyle. There are other factors that are important, such as how much fiber in the diet, soft water, the use of sugar, and so-called personality type A, which is wrong, of course. Now, when people are evaluated for these risk factors, it's possible to predict with a frightening accuracy who's going to develop the disease. If a person has 2 or 3 risk factors, within the next 10 years, you or other people have a chance of 1 in 2 that they're going to develop heart disease. Now let's talk about the cholesterol connection. Despite Thomas Moore, who wrote a very exciting article in the Atlantic Monthly saying that this was a myth, he was wrong. I think he was intellectually dishonest. He didn't present the picture right, but he served a useful purpose to bringing it up to attention. There's no question that the level of cholesterol in the blood determines whether you're going to develop heart disease. Experimentally, it's been shown that they can produce the disease in almost every experimental animal you want, meaning monkeys and dogs and chickens and humans. The process can be produced, accelerated, slowed down, and reversed, not only in these animal studies, but also in humans. Regression, this is the word that's important. What is it? That's the reversal of this atherosclerotic process. Has it only occurred recently? Not at all. It's been occurring for centuries, but has not been recognized. There have been ups and downs as these fatty plaques are filled into the artery. And depending upon the conditions of the individual, those fatty plaques, those foamy cells, fatty foam cells, can be reduced. These plaques are like mounds of rust in pipes. They can progress finally to being firm and hard and built up and calcified. Calcium is the same stuff found in cement, and finally cause distress. Sometimes symptoms, heart attacks, and as I mentioned, sudden cardiac death. This dynamic process was described as long ago as 1924 when Aschoff showed in Europe that certain diets produced damage to the arteries. During World War I and World War II, one of the beneficial observations was that coronary disease began to drop. So much so that in the occupied countries of Europe, particularly in Holland, for example, where good data are available, when the Germans requisitioned the fat for the Vaterland, that's almost a pun, the body fat went down, heart disease practically disappeared, and 8 months after the war was over, it reoccurred. And pathologists who were doing autopsies at that time found that the disease had decreased during the war occupation, despite the emotional stress, etc. In Holland, you were lucky. You didn't have petrol for a car, but if you had a bicycle with working tires, you could at least use the bicycle. In my own personal experience, I was with the troops in World War II that liberated Belsen-Bergen concentration camps, and I found that people who had had coronary disease, despite the horrendous aspects of the furnaces and the murder that the Germans were inflicting upon these people, that their symptoms had disappeared. I happened to have the experience that a year or 2 or 3 years later, I saw some of these people as patients right here in Cleveland, and they had regained the body fatness, the body weight, and they regained the symptoms. And I told them, go home, pretend that you were in a concentration camp, except there are no furnaces, no fires, no graves, and go back to a low-fat, low-cholesterol diet. Now, this saga of arteriosclerosis is worthwhile because it portrays our ignorance as well as our success. First of all, it was, number one, they failed to recognize that its presence was significant. The great Sir William Osler in 1905 did not think that the lesions found in people who had died with coronary disease that was significant clinically. And then finally in 1916, Herrick found that he could diagnose a heart attack by using the electrocardiogram, and from that time it became easier to recognize it. I might ask you in the audience, how many of you have had an electrocardiogram within the past year? Raise your hand. We're getting there. How many of you have had an automobile license in the past year? Which is more important? Okay. An epidemiologic studies show that you can predict it. The interventions were first in this way. We thought we were very good to prevent sudden cardiac death. That's opening the chest, massaging the heart, arrhythmias. Then we gave medicine to dissolve clots, which actually reduced the mortality rate. Then we said, let's improve the function. So even if you've lost, pardon 1 second. That's terrible. Even if you lost one finger, you can teach the other 9 fingers to work well. So we were able to enhance the function of the residual muscle. Then there was a development of heart surgery, and I must mention people like Claude Beck, and later the also-rans that followed him. Then it was possible to restore the blood supply to a certain extent, and that wasn't good enough because finally the risk factors were diagnosed and then action to develop to prevent it and to cause regression. I have to bring up that when we began to propose 30 years ago that we could reverse arteriosclerosis, it was mind-boggling, and I was told it was outrageous. It was outrageous. And I bring this up because it occurred. This involved basic science. And I'm reminded that when Humphrey, not Hubert, the other Humphrey, was Secretary of Treasury in Eisenhower's regime in 1954, he pooh-poohed the importance of basic research. And he said, basic science, pooh. Why, that's like trying to answer the question, can you unfry an egg? What a fantastically profound statement, to unfry an egg, to change a protein that's coagulated to a liquid form. If you could change the protein in the arteries and vessels of an old person to become young and elastic. But he didn't realize how profound his poo-poo was. Actually, in 1933, my professor of chemistry, Frank Havorka, in talking to our second-year class in college, said, here are 3 current impossibilities in 1933. 1, to release the energy of the atom. 2, to create life or protein. And 3, to reverse time. And if you knew Frank Havorka, he looked at us, the class, with a twinkle in his eye, and he said, which one, who of you will address these challenges? Well, we know, of course, that the energy has been released from the atom. 2 is proteins have already been synthesized, which is the first step to increasing life and producing life. And 3rd, we have not yet been able to reverse time, chronologic time, despite Star Trek and fiction, science fiction, but we can reverse physiologic time. Meaning as people get older, they usually become less fit, and we've shown that we can make old people physically as young people. So there's still some doubters, and I mentioned Thomas More, or you probably saw yesterday or day before yesterday's 10-second squib on television saying that there was an 80-year-old man who ate 25 eggs a day for the last 10 years and he didn't have coronary disease. Well, they did metabolic studies on this unusual person and found that while he ate those eggs, he didn't absorb them. In addition, his body turned down its own rate of synthesis of cholesterol, and he escaped as yet. But of course, I must remind you, this old man had Alzheimer's disease and was demented. Now, this gap between what's known and done exists not only in the physicians, but also among the public. For example, in a survey of physician practices, 33% of patients seen by physicians within the past 6 months were not routinely advised about their diet or weight control. 34% were not advised regarding the importance of exercise. 60% of the women were not advised as to the need for mammograms. Obviously, there's a terrible unfulfilled gap between what is known and what is done. Now, what are the landmarks of severity? And there's no question that if one uses a level of 200 milligrams per DL of cholesterol, the risk starts to go up. The risk below that is very, very low. Or the bad cholesterol called LDL cholesterol, it shouldn't go above 120. It's easy to measure. For my information, how many of you have had your total cholesterol or HDL cholesterol or LDL cholesterol or triglycerides measured within the last 2 years? Raise your hands. Hooray. Now we're getting there. And the rest of you who didn't, you're laggards. Now the work of Nobel laureates Brown and Goldstein in Texas and other scientists have told us how this works. That bad cholesterol called LDL cholesterol is oxidized, meaning it combines with oxygen, and it comes to the blood vessels, to the inside there, and it irritates the lining of the vessels. It causes, almost like a cancer, it causes smooth muscle to grow. It produces this plaque which obstructs it. Now what's interesting, this was basic science for which Nobel Prizes were awarded. It was found that there's a dump truck, as it were, called HDL cholesterol. It's able, when it increases, it goes to these areas and causes a transport, a reverse transport, and can unload these fatty plaques. By the way, the event preceded the explanation. We showed this years ago this happened, but the understanding of why it occurred. So, in essence, we know that it's reversible. The question is, if it occurred so frequently, why wasn't it recognized before? It's interesting, 30-some years ago, my associates and I studied a group of people who had died from inanition, who had cancer with metastases or from tuberculosis or anorexia nervosa, and we found evidence of reversal of atherosclerosis. And at that time, I wrote prophetically that perhaps selective undernutrition would have a clinical application to reverse heart disease. And today, we know this is the case. Now, there are many myths that occur today. It's impossible to dispel them, one of which is if you lower your cholesterol, you'll develop cancer. And that's as recent within the last month. And it's no question that is not true. It's the other way around. People who will develop cancer of the colon, for example, have been studied, as it were, over a period of time, 6 or 8 months before that. What happens is the cholesterol starts to go down because in the gene of people who have susceptibility for cancer of the colon, what's called the locus, right near there, there's another part of that gene which turns on the body to produce more LDL receptors to bring it down. Some smart man or woman is going to find out how to get that gene and give it to people just to lower the cholesterol itself. So in essence, lowering the cholesterol does not produce cancer. Then there's a question, should you do this anyway because you'll create anxiety? Just think, if you measure cholesterol in everybody, there can be some people whose cholesterol will not be elevated or elevated won't be as significant for other reasons, particularly if they're females. Women, fortunately, develop their coronary disease about 10 to 15 years later than men because they have high HDL cholesterol, which is good. And furthermore, once nature blows the whistle and menopause occurs, then those women began to behave like men. So is there evidence that arteriosclerosis is reversed in addition to what I've said? Yes. There have been studies done in Finland, Holland, and the United States where people who have so-called normal coronary arteries have been given drugs or have been put on a diet or given a bile sequestration which holds on to the bile that prevents cholesterol from being reabsorbed. And they've also done studies on humans where they've taken coronary arteriograms before and after intervention, randomized one half into yes, this intervention, the other just going on their own sinful ways. This is prospective, and there's no question that arteriosclerosis is reversed, showing a coronary disease. The question, though, is the draconian approach necessary to be on a true vegetarian diet with no chicken, no fish, no milk, no eggs, no taste? Is it necessary to go on that? The answer is no. For the last 7 or 8 years, since 1982, I've been going to China as a consultant to the National Heart and Lung and Blood Institute, and there in China, people eat 20% fat calories, most of which come from non-animal source. From age 18 to 80, their cholesterol goes from 160 to 180, and if you take 100,000 people aged, say, 40 to 80, we in the United States would have 6 times as many heart attacks as they have in China for 100,000 people. So the draconian approach is not necessary. In the research studies, people whose cholesterol were 300 to start with intervention, it came down to 250 cholesterol, and there was regression. And the regression is only 15 to 20% of the lesions, but that's not bad. In our own studies, and some of you in the audience have participated in these studies, we have studied people who have coronary disease, and this was done almost 30 years ago. We put them in an intervention program, and they're not dying now the way they're supposed to. Ordinarily, people with coronary disease were dying at the rate of 6 per 100 per year. 50% were dead, 60% were dead in 8 years or 10 years. Today, in our series of people with intervention, after a heart attack, they're dying at the rate of 1.92 per 100 per year, 2 per 100 people per year, which means the average person in the intervention program, usually they were about 55 years old or 50 years old, half of them are going to live another 25 years. And you obviously know that this prolonged survival has produced an unexpected burden on the Social Security system, and it's a welcome problem for future politicians to handle. I hope some of them are right here to deal with this problem, what to do with these long-living individuals. Now the question is about guilt. How much guilt should you have, and I personalize you, if you have been listening, and if you know, and if you accept, and if you have violated your body, and if you have a family history of heart disease or stroke, and if you have high blood fat, and if you have blood pressures not regulated, and if you are sloppy and indolent, and if you use a poison called tobacco, should you feel guilty in this present age? Yes, you should. This is a burden. It's important because this is self-inflicted. It's self-inflicted. Now, the point is, so if you have done all these evil things, should you give up? And the answer is no, because it's still reversible in large part. In essence, it's never too late to start secondary preventive programs. The concept of personal guilt is very important because people who develop AIDS, I'm not talking about those who innocently had a transfusion which was contaminated, should they feel guilty about their own personal hazardous behavior? And the answer is yes. That doesn't mean they shouldn't be given help and treatment, but they bear a guilt. So I ask, what are you going to do about it? Are we winning? Yes. Can you imagine that individuals like Sokolov, who has been advertising, he himself had a heart attack as a young man. He's bombarded the newspapers and radio and television with advertisements saying, "You are killing us," referring to McDonald's, Wendy's, and others. He lambasted them so much, and he's been written up recently this way. He's had so much of an impact that McDonald's and other purveyors of fast food are changing the time of fat that's being used in preparing their foods, and happily, their salad bars and happy places like burgers and others are now broiling chicken. So we have been able to change public behavior by personal assaults against the enemy. In summary, the hope is that coronary disease will be truly conquered. It's inexcusable to have 600,000 people die each year. At least 200,000 or 300,000 of those should have lived another 10 years. And I bring this up because it's not bad to die, but it's bad to die prematurely. And certainly with the idea of living 10 or 15 more years, then one can face the specter of Alzheimer's disease or other dementia. I hope that the forthcoming generation of medical students are going to face what we faced in a different way. When I started medical school 50-some years ago, 77% of our students were tested for tuberculin reaction. Well, 100% were tested, and 77 had a positive reaction. In essence, we have been exposed to tuberculosis clinically or subclinically. Today, medical students, when tested, 3% only have a positive test for tuberculin, and those 3% are given treatment as if they had the active disease. My expectation is that the same thing is going to happen for the next generation, namely, the next generation, that when the students look through the data, they'll find that coronary disease is as rare as it was in World War II during the German occupation. It's likely that we're going to hear a lot more about this scourge once AIDS gets off the headlines, because the public appreciates the substantial reduction in mortality rate from acute heart attacks. In fact, we know instead of being in the hospital for 6 weeks after a heart attack, that we reduced it to 4 weeks, to 3 weeks, to 2 weeks. And now when a person comes in the beginning phase of a heart attack, we are able to study them, we dissolve the clots, we dilate the vessels, and then we put them on a strict program of secondary prevention, and they're home with a week, 5 days, 7 days from 6 weeks' time. The public appreciates that. We hope that this is going to occur. When Lyndon Johnson in 1964 established a commission, and I was fortunate to serve on it, a commission to control heart disease, cancer, and stroke, it seemed as if it were a dream. We already know that part of the dream, at least as far as stroke is concerned, and of coronary disease, is being realized. The public now has to realize, to recapitulate, that coronary disease is no longer an answer to overpopulation. Why? Because it smites people who have already completed their reproductive activity. Rarely does it involve people in the 20s and 30s. The prerequisites for the control of the scourge of coronary disease are being fulfilled. What are they? 1, there's a wide recognition and acceptance that the problem exists, and that's significant. 2, there's enough knowledge today to deal with this problem in a logical, unemotional fashion in a public health standpoint. 3, societal action to develop and use the resources which are available is commencing. And 4, there's unequivocal acceptance that a large part of arteriosclerosis can be reversed, essentially equivalent to what Secretary Humphrey's concept was of basic science. You remember? Unfrying the egg. And by the way, we still do not know how to unfry the egg, but we sure can reverse arteriosclerosis. Thank you.
You take your seat. I'll make a few announcements. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, the City Club has presented today Dr. Herman Hallerstein, who's been talking to us about everything you want to know about the heart. Dr. Hallerstein, I have looked over many an audience this year, and I have failed to find one that is attentive to your lecture 101 of advice to these people. It's just been fascinating, and you have presented a very serious subject in a most meaningful way. I imagine your students enjoy sitting before you to have this highly scientific discussion in a manner that you can understand. Most of you did, I could tell by the nod of your head. Before we go into our regular question period, there are a few announcements that I would like to make. The first one is to suggest that all of you who are not members of this marvelous institution become members. We need your support to carry on these magnificent learning sessions. Again, this week, the students are absent, unfortunately, because they're still in their spring break. But I know they would have enjoyed you as much as we had if they were here. Next Friday at our regular forum time, our speaker will be the chairman and CEO of Continental Airlines. Hollis L. Harris, speaking on air service in the future of Cleveland and the United States. Then 2 weeks from today, the City Club is proud again this year to sponsor, as we have for the past 19 years now, the annual high school debating finals. We have found these to be extremely interesting in the past. This year, the debate is between Orange High School and St. Ignatius. This year, the national debate topic is resolved that showing disrespect for the American flag is antithetical. Take note, antithetical to fundamental American values. So next week, air travel, and in 2 weeks, burning the flag. Make your reservations very, very soon. Now, we have 2 microphones for the questioners, one in the front by Alan Davis and one in the rear by Lillian Anderson. As I have suggested in the past, confine your time to a question, and if you must make a speech, see me. I'll refer you to any one of our forum members or special program members, and they'll schedule you at another time and perhaps at another place. Dr. Halstein.
Sir, would it not be an answer to the problem of dietary cholesterol and dietary saturated fatty acids to simply have the medical profession lobby with the Congress, the senators and the representatives in Congress, simply to make it illegal for any farmer ever to sell anything which has saturated fatty acids in or cholesterol? I mean, that's consistent with, say, thoughts about banning North Carolina from growing tobacco. Would that not be a considerable answer?
Oh, that's a horrible, horrible idea. There are not lousy foods, there are lousy diets. Well, I think it'd be a terrible thing. There are some benefits to various substances, and I believe in joie de vivre. There is obviously a need for variation. I believe in debauchery about once a year. As a matter of fact, some people have it recurrent, chronic, intermittent, and relapsing. But seriously, my associates and I, when we go to the arteriosclerosis meeting of the American Heart Association once a year, I will eat a visible egg just to prove that I know what it tastes like. Of course, there are eggs and other things. No, I think I thought you were going to indicate we should lobby, which we have done, that foods should be properly labeled. For example, it's a terrible thing for a food to be advertised as being cholesterol-free, and they have palm kernel oil or coconut oil as part of the oil, and that's just as bad as because it predisposes to the development of formation of cholesterol in the body. No, I'm against outlawing food. I think we need to educate people rather than to outlaw it. And obviously it's changing. For example, skim milk today is being sold widely. When I was a boy living out in the country, they used to throw skim milk to the hogs. Now we do. But so, I mean, we eat them. Yes.
Except for spring vacation, there would be a group of high school students here to meet with you today. Now, these students are young. Our audience here have children and grandchildren who are the same age. What would you recommend that these people do so that they will not become the heart statistics you've been talking about?
Well, first of all, the kids are smarter than we were. Because, first place, there's no question that children today are more physically active, that they're watching their diet. With our 6 children in the various universities, it's impressive how many of the universities have special arrangements for salads, etc. But the point is, it's a social class phenomenon. It's a social class phenomenon. People of upper social class, referring to education, etc., are leaner, more exercise, lower cholesterol, they live long. The big problem, and this is a terrible problem, the problem is how to get to people of the lower socioeconomic class. I remember attending the White House Conference on Nutrition with General Benjamin Davis, who was here in Cleveland at that time. And this conference was on malnutrition and undernutrition. And it was remarkable that somebody got up. It was a big, fat woman who happened to be black. And she said 20 million people go to bed every night hungry. And General Benjamin Davis sitting next to me said, yes, and all of them are fat. The point is, it's hard. It's hard. America is the only, USA is the only country in the world where poor people are fat. It's a matter of teaching them. We were told at that conference the Hispanic men don't want their women thin. So there's a matter of education. We did studies on children in the inner city, Shaker, Cleveland Heights, and Exurbia, and we found the children in the inner city were fatter, smoked more, ate more fatty foods, ate more food in the fast food places. Their health was bad. The time to begin is with the adults as to what they eat at home. I think in the Song of Solomon or whatnot, some places said, raise up a child and away it will go and won't depart from it. You're right. But there's no question that there is progress being made, but it basically is a problem of the education of the lower social class.
Dr. Hellerstein, in your talk, I think on at least 3 occasions you mentioned the poison of tobacco. Yet, as a government, we continue to subsidize the tobacco industry. We have large billboard advertisements extolling tobacco. To what extent do you personally feel, and to what extent are the heart associations and the medical groups in favor of taking some really draconian was the word you used, action regarding the tobacco industry? And I'm thinking even of the period of time that you and I remember of even alcohol when we had a prohibition. Would you be willing to go that far regarding tobacco?
No, I'm against the poison called tobacco. I think the tobacco industry should start raising nicotine for killing insects instead of people. By the way, it is a good poison, but we're making progress. 47% of Americans used to smoke cigarettes. In certain groups, it's about down to 8 or 10%. So progress being made. No, I think the point is there has to be alternative products that the tobacco people can raise with, so they have a cash product. Certainly, the fact that radio and television banned cigarette advertisements has had an important role. By the way, in Europe, 70 to 75% of people who develop coronary disease are smoking. So we've made considerable progress, but not enough. I don't like the idea that government should decide what you're going to do. In the final analysis, each one of us has responsibility from what we put in our hand and put in our mouth. And that responsibility is there. We can educate the public, educate the students, but I'm against that type of banning. I think probably a cigarette or a cigar once a year at the wedding or the birth of a grandchild is probably all right.
Dr. Hellerstein,
yes, sir.
When you listed the risk factors for coronary artery disease, you didn't mention family history. Should we infer from this that that is much less important than the other items that you did mention?
Oh, I must apologize. I should have listed that. Oh, yes. The family history is extremely important in this sense that those who have a premature development of coronary artery disease or heart disease or stroke or gout or diabetes, this is very important. But if your family history is excellent, and if your parents lived to the 90s, etc., don't bet on it, because your life is different from theirs. They didn't have refrigerators. They didn't have elevators. They didn't have automobiles. They couldn't store fatty foods in the refrigerator. The foods were not manipulated as they are now. So don't bet on your ancestry to protect you. But by all means, it is important. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. Family history is so well known, so that don't ignore it. Neither the favorable, unfavorable aspect. You have the opportunity. If you have a family history of premature development of heart disease, you can change your family history for your children. As a matter of fact, there's several people in the audience, or friends of several of my patients in the audience here, where 2 brothers in their 40s enter to my care. One accepts the idea of intervention, the other not. And no male in that family ever lived beyond 45. Today, there's one who went through the intervention program. He's now 74, 75 years old. The brother, as a match control, as it were, died 2 or 3 years after the study because he didn't believe it. So it's important. It's important to know that family history is important, but you have it within your capacity to change your children's family history, at least for one generation.
I appreciate very much your very informative presentation, but there were two things you didn't mention, aspirin and caffeine. I've been taking aspirin for the last 50 years. 10 years ago, I had a triple bypass. Now, is there a limit if you take too much aspirin? Because I see ads in the magazines, a child's portion of aspirin will prevent a heart attack daily. Not the heart attack daily, but the aspirin daily. And the other, there's a lot of controversy on decaf coffee and regular coffee.
All right. First of all, about the aspirin, that's a wonderful story. A general practitioner down in Texas treating people with arthritis over many years noticed that they didn't die from heart disease as much as others, and was poo-pooed at first, but found that aspirin, which is a fantastic drug, so powerful, it should probably be sold at $1 or $5 a tablet. And Bayer's and others made a mistake when they sold it so cheaply. It is anti-inflammatory, it reduces the temperature, and it changes how cells get together and stick. And there's no question that an aspirin a day, or a baby aspirin called 80 milligrams, will produce some beneficial effect. Namely, it will reduce the number of heart attacks. But this did not produce regression. It just prevents further progression of the event. And the argument whether it's baby aspirin or 325 milligrams aspirin, that's being resolved by prospective studies. When it comes to caffeine, there's a big debate still going on because, unfortunately, it's hard to separate. The average person who's having a cup of coffee, what's in the coffee? Sugar and cream. And then in addition to that, when you have some coffee, what you're apt to do is have a high-fat, high-cholesterol, tasty morsel called a donut. So you have to factor that out. Then, in fact, the question is also how many cups of coffee. There's no question that people who drink 5 or 10 cups of coffee a day have bigger problems because in coffee, there's caffeine, and that stimulates the system. And about 6% out of 100, 6 people out of 100 who drink that much coffee will have irregularities of the heartbeat. And if they have underlying heart disease, that may precipitate a significant heart attack. When it comes to decaf coffee, that study was done in Europe, and their preparation of coffee was a little different from ours. I think, by and large, it's so trivial compared to the major problem. In other words, if you eat an egg or eat eggs or high-fat, high-cholesterol, the coffee factor is a small factor. It's almost the same order, significant when you tell your children when they cross the street, do you keep both eyes open or one eye? But I would not discourage people from drinking coffee if it's black. It's not necessary to put a sweetener in. I'm not against sugar because that has been overrated, that have a little sugar for coffee. I don't use sugar myself, but I would say be reasonable about how much coffee. I was on Wide Wide World when David, I forget who it was the host. I went to New York in preparation of the program, and they had pretty girls wearing short skirts and carrying coffee. He drank 8 or 10 cups of coffee in that afternoon. And I finally said to him, I said, do you have any side effects from this? And he was jittery like this. It wasn't because of my presence.
As you mentioned, many of the risk factors associated with heart disease are what you call social class problems or related to income. In addition to bad habits, lower income people tend to have little access to quality medical care. Could you give us your view of the relationship of lack of access to quality medical care and heart disease in America?
Well, that's sort of a loaded question in this respect. Depends on which part of the country you're in terms of that. The magnitude of the problem of distribution of proper care for the 35 million people who are underserved at the present time, that's well recognized. The obesity, the smoking, the facts that the social classes, in fact, Stunkard professor from the University of Pennsylvania, did studies on obesity. There's more obesity in America in the lower social classes than the upper social classes. That is not due to access to medical care. They can read and write. Or, for example, in running and jogging, it's a rare thing to find some of the minority people. To run doesn't take very much. I'm talking in terms of equipment. There are a lot of behavioral things on a mass scale. In essence, there has to be societal action. The medical profession bears a certain responsibility. I was going to use the word certain guilt in terms of access of care in opposition to a better health care availability system. But the big problem today is not the mortality rate from high blood pressure, for example, is not due to a lack of access to care. My wife works as a doctor who works in the inner city, and whether it's at Huff Norwood or other places like that, and it's hard to get people who are worried about food tomorrow to be concerned about taking a drug to treat high blood pressure. The beneficial effects of treatment may not be apparent for 10 years. The urgency of the economics of a house, of a job, of home far outweighs the activity toward prevention. So, yes, I think medical care should be more accessible, particularly to people who are called disadvantaged. But a big part is public education. Mr. Taft was just talking about funds for education, etc. It's important that we have more monies available for education of all of our citizens throughout the country, not that Shaker Heights or Orange Village or Cleveland Heights would spend twice as much as the inner city, because this is a behavioral problem. The treatment, the control, for example, of typhoid fever, of diarrheas, stem basically from teaching people to wash their hands. So there are elementary things that should be done at the person level. So I deplore the lack of care, and the most important part is the willingness to enter into the care system, because many of these people are overwhelmed by the social and economic problems of everyday existence.
Doctor, I think most of us know what the problems are and what we should be doing, but find ourselves on what I call a roller coaster, where you lose weight, gain it, exercise more, stop exercising as much. I would suggest the problem is not only in the stomach but in the mind. What can you do to get on the right course and stay on it?
Well, first of all, you have to appreciate, you should say you have to enjoy life. Do you enjoy living and loving and working? The answer is yes. In fact, in German, there's an expression that says, with proper German accent, jedes Mensch hat das Schlüssel von sein eigenes Schicksal, which says every person has the key to their own destiny. Don't blame anybody else. And I bring up the importance of the nuclear family, of mama and of papa, and of peer pressures, of peer activities. And the point is, you may need help. Some people find they have to go out to a very elegant place. I remember giving a talk out in the West Coast, out in Arizona, and paid $2,500 for a 5-day stay to be brainwashed, to defatted, desmoked, exercise, stress management, etc. And that's all right for a few people. But the point is, how do you enter into a system? If you need help, join a help. There are support groups, just like there are support groups for people who are habitual gamblers or child abusers or whatever the other thing is. No, it has to be a public health thing. In this roller coaster business you mentioned, up and down, there are many people who have lost several tons of weight and regained it. And that's not the answer. So you need support group, and the place to start first with yourself. Look at yourself in the mirror and say, who am I? What am I? Do I have control of my destiny? When I feel like eating like a pig or a hog, can I find alternatives? Do I understand why I use food as a way of escaping from the realities with which I can't cope? These are important things. It's interesting, obesity is not a problem in Ethiopia. It's not a problem in Chile. It's not a problem in Cyprus. Others, we have such access. I personally would like to have some bright young man or woman have a device by the refrigerator, and you have an type of IBM card, and you stand on a scale, and before that thing will open, it reads you and says, no, not today. Or you can...
Dr. Hellerstein, I can understand how exercise is important in an overall life pattern because it does use up calories and it helps keep you from being too fat. But I wonder, I don't think I've ever understood how exercise itself, just using the big muscles of the body, could have some direct effect on the health of your heart. Is there any direct connection there, or is it indirect through your sort of overall body size and tone?
Mr. Taft, thank you for this question. My associates and I and others have done studies. Exercise training, it does not have to be marathon running. For those people who are 50, 60, or 70, walking 2 or 3 or 4 miles a day at average pace is enough. What exercise does, it increases what is called fibrinolysis. It's a material that causes blood to dissolve clots. 2 is it causes the total cholesterol to go down and the good cholesterol called HDL cholesterol to increase. In addition to that, it increases the enzyme capabilities of the skeletal muscles, so the muscle is able to take up more oxygen per unit passage. More importantly, it changes even such things as the intraocular pressure in the eyes. It changes the hearing acuity, and I don't know whether this is important in this group, it even enhances sexual activity within the constellation. And it has effects on catecholamines. It's been shown that it decreases depression, and it does this on a biochemical basis. It's not all in the mind as an ethereal thought. There are basic biochemical changes that are taking place with exercise. Let me just point out, 800 years ago, our program was described in a book written called The Preservation of Youth. It was written by Maimonides for the Sultan of Egypt, and his program was exercise daily to the point of breathlessness, which we know is called the anaerobic threshold. Avoid fatty meats. Don't eat fish from polluted rivers. The bread should be coarse and not refined. And avoid obesity. And he pointed also the time to exercise early day. And he said, I will not extol the value of a little wine because the Muslims were against wine at that time, against alcohol at that time. His program was written 800 years ago. And he understood the physiology, but we have described the physiology. Exercise to the point of breathlessness. All fatty substances are bad. Last but not least, he wrote, all cheeses are bad except that cheese which is white and sweet and not more than 24 hours old. Which cheese is that? Cottage cheese. 800 years ago.
Very much. Just read the light. Thank you, and welcome, Mrs. Holstein. We're happy to have you with us today as well. The forum is adjourned.
Will burning garbage to make energy help alleviate our landfill crisis or cause more air pollution? Join us for this town hall meeting live debate, including your chance to participate. Monday night at 10 on WVIZ.
Transmission of today's programs is made possible by members of TV 25 and the following.
The Huntington National Bank, the personal bankers. Each and every customer is assigned a personal banker because the Huntington takes your banking needs personally. Member FDIC.
And Alpha Park, a high-technology complex housing 120 companies with 1,600 employees who are helping to lead Greater Cleveland into the 21st century.
Do you have any dreams for the future?
I see a lot of teenagers saying, God, I wish I was like you, I wish I had a baby.
You can meet them anywhere in America. Young people in crisis.
I moved out when I was 14, got married when I was 15.
Young lives are at stake. So is the nation's future. Join me for an evening with all our children.
Wednesday at 8 on TV 25. You're watching Northeast Ohio's weekend how-to station, TV 25 WVIZ.
This time on Motor Week 91, we test BMW's 6 Series successor, the 850i.
Lisa Barrow introduces us to the federal government's #1 safety man. We'll drive the Geo Storm hatchback, and Craig Singhaus will look back at the Chrysler Hemi engine. So come drive with us next.
Motor Week 91, television's automotive magazine, is made possible by the financial support of public television viewers like you. Your host from Motor Week 91, John Davis.
Well, hello and welcome again to Motor Week 91. We're glad to have you with us. The initials GT, which stand for Gran Turismo, or as we say in America, Grand Touring, are among the most misused of all automotive designations. GT emblems have adorned everything from econo boxes to pickup trucks. To us, GT should signify the ultimate combination of luxury, style, and speed. One car that defined the GT spirit best was the BMW 635i. Beautifully styled with loads of comfort and performance, it was a true long-distance runner. Well, now the 6 Series BMW is history, replaced by this new 850i. It's even more beautiful and has every creature comfort imaginable. But what about performance and the less easily defined attribute, character? It was the careful mingling of the two that made the 635i such a standout GT, something that the 850i's designers have not forgotten. There are some cars whose character stirs the soul, others with the technical complexity to challenge the intellect, and still others with luxury that pampers the body. With the 850i, BMW has attempted to assemble all of these traits into a GT that builds on and then eclipses the reputation of its 6 Series predecessors. There is a look of history in the 850i's design. Like the legendary M1 supercar of the late 70s, the 850i features a long sloping nose and pop-up headlamps. But from there on back are only the flowing curves dictated by modern aerodynamic demands. Subtle wheel arches flare out from the body to cover 7.5-inch wide alloy wheels. They wear 235/50/16 Z-rated rubber. Behind the wheels is the beginnings of the 850i's mechanical complexity. The rear suspension is a new BMW multi-link design that reduces the car's reaction to sudden load changes and provides passive rear steering in hard corners. An electronic damping control system is optional. It automatically readjusts shock firmness according to road and driving conditions. The front suspension uses more conventional struts. It supports an engine bay that holds the 850i's 5-liter V12 engine. Despite its 296 horsepower output, the aluminum block unit, which also lives in the 750iL sedan, is the lightest V12 available in a production car. But different intake and exhaust tuning give it a slightly more aggressive sound than the sedan. Its 332 pound-feet of torque allows over 2 tons of BMW to reach 60 in 6.2 seconds. A quarter mile takes 14.9 seconds, ending at 100 miles per hour. For times when tremendous torque is not desirable, such as bad weather, the driver can switch on the optional traction control system. The system, called ACS Plus T, reduces throttle speed and even applies the rear brakes to improve traction. A handy thing to have considering the deceptive smoothness of the V12 engine. Power flows through a new 6-speed manual gearbox. Both it and the clutch are the smoothest such units that we've yet encountered in a BMW. A 4-speed automatic is available as a no-cost option. European 6th gear is perfect for cruising, even at our lower highway speeds. Downshift for passing, and the car surges forward like a cultured locomotive, its normally subtle engine note rising as slower traffic blurs by. The ride is firm but quiet. At American highway speeds, the cabin noise level remains very low at 64 decibels. That's thanks in part to the chassis' remarkable solidity and the unique system which automatically lowers and raises windows each time a door is opened for a better seal. On twistier roads, the 850i's 2-ton weight is apparent. With the traction control system turned off, handling is nearly neutral. If used foolishly, the V12's substantial torque will quickly break the rear end loose. Used wisely, and it mates with the new rear suspension for impressive cornering control. With the traction control system turned on, limited power means car control is safe but less precise. Of course, any car with sporting aspirations had better have good brakes. The 850i has excellent ones. The huge 12.8-inch disc in standard ABS yanking it down from 60 in only 108 feet. But for all its sporting abilities, the 850i does not skimp one iota on luxury. There's all the fine leather and comfort features that one expects in Germany's best. But the fluid interior design is a departure from the conservative shapes one usually finds in a BMW. The seats are the expected leather-covered buckets. Power adjustments include thigh and lumbar support. They combine with a power tilt and telescoping steering wheel to offer an easy driver fit. But the seat padding is German firm, which proved unpopular with some American backs on our staff. Seat heaters and memory are standard equipment. The 850i has front seat belts that are attached to the seats themselves, similar to the system used in the Mercedes-Benz 500 SL. A big safety and comfort improvement over normal belts. There's also a standard driver's side airbag. Gauges are large and very clear, but in the German tradition, surprisingly sparse. Luxury-oriented or not, this is a performance car. Oil pressure and volt readouts, if you please. Nestled at the top center of the sloping dash is one of the most comprehensive trip computers that we've ever seen. Below that sits an easy-to-operate and very powerful cassette stereo. The controls also operate a multi-disc CD player, which resides in the trunk for better security. The dual automatic climate controls are standard BMW style, and that means all but idiot-proof. 850i buyers also get a standard cellular phone as part of the package. To say that rear seat room is tight in the 850i would be an understatement, and thanks to the minimal forward seat back movement, getting in or out is almost impossible for your average adult. And if you don't lock the backrest into position properly, the trip computer will tell you so. Trunk opening can be clumsy due to the odd vertical lock position. The opening requires you to slide rather than drop cargo in, but the space itself is quite generous. By this point, you're probably tired of details and aching to know the price of all this, so here it is. The 850i retails for $73,600. With its optional forged alloy wheels, traction control system, and automatic shock damping, our fully loaded test car goes for $77,570. That is less than a Mercedes-Benz 500 SL. But more than just about everything else on the road. But considering the 850i's level of technology, that's not surprising. BMW's ultimate Grand Touring Coupe is a rolling showcase for Bavaria's engineering talent. But unlike some sterile show car, it's also a machine that touches a driver on a more emotional level, while the tactile and visual senses are pleased by its luxury and styling. All in all, the 850i is a most impressive achievement that shows both how much BMW has learned and how much it remembers. The last few years have been a time of major change in the automotive industry. Sophisticated technology has never been more prevalent. And as even the least expensive cars gain in performance, safety becomes a major concern. Everyone has an opinion in the performance versus safety debate, but only a select few have the power to really influence the course of future car design. In the first of her FYI profile series, Lisa Barrow recently talked to one such person.
Our bottom line always must be measured in terms of did you or did you not, with this particular action, save a life.
General Jerry Ralph Curry is the administrator of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. NHTSA, as it's most commonly called, is the government agency charged with developing and enforcing automotive safety doctrines. We talked with General Curry about his position on
At 10 in the morning, and
10 at night, although they vary from city to city. So it's just great to have them on again.
Well, let's talk about, you know, realistically, you are the father of what we look upon as talk television today.
I never did figure out who the mother was, but I'd like to get a card from her if she's
your
out
beautiful bride. How is she?
Actually, Jane, yeah, she's fine. She actually has made a lot of important contributions to my shows over the years, for few of which she ever got credit.
Strangely enough, a few nights ago, I ran into Audrey and... Oh, dear God, forgive me.
Audrey and oh, dear God, that's an interesting combination. I haven't seen them together in
Neary's
years.
in New York, Neary's pub in New York. The other lady who was on the
that's Joyce Randolph Martin.
Thank you so much, Neil. It gets so difficult when my brain thins, but my hair doesn't.
Are you trying to pretend like that was before your time or something?
No.
Okay.
How many of you people out there really like Neil? How many of you would be really upset if he lost his job? Don't have many comrades out there, Neil, baby. All right. Question. You started The Tonight Show. You did that for how many years?
4 years. It was on just locally for the first year or so. And then the NBC people, I think, accidentally discovered it one night as available to them, since they ran the whole network, and they made a nice decision. They decided to lift us up out of the local spot and put us on the whole network, and that was terrific.
You are so prolific as an entertainer, as a talent. Most people come out and they're a talk show host, or they're an actor, or they're a comedian, or they write songs, or they write novels. You have written, I believe, 35 books.
Yeah, the 33rd, 34th, and 35th all came out within the last 3 weeks.
You've written 4,000 songs.
Something like that, yeah.
You're a phenomenal piano player.
I play.
An excellent actor. A great comedian.
No wonder I'm exhausted.
A humanitarian. And you can't find anyone who doesn't like Steve Allen. Does that bug you?
Oh, no, that's nice.
Because I have the same problem.
Well, you do, you know, controversial stuff. And truly, if you take a stand on any issue, even if God would say, hey, you're right, keep it up, you'll get postcards from people who say, you're wrong, mother's milk is not the best thing for a baby, or whatever you're talking about.
But did you plan your life in a way that you would do all these things? Did you have a family that said, well, Steve, come here, honey, you're going to take your piano lesson today, violin lesson tomorrow, Mommy wants to show you how to write prose. Did you have to go through that?
Oddly enough, the only parental input was sort of critical and negative. They tried to discourage me from being in showbiz. You know yourself, since your father was a great entertainer. I don't say you know, but maybe he said to you.
No, he discouraged me.
Yeah, most entertainers do. You folks would probably be surprised to hear that. Whatever top 57 stars you might name, I'll bet about 53 of them tried to keep Junior or little Barbara out of showbiz.
Well, maybe in our generation, but I look at this generation and I see the Martin Sheens bringing their kids in. I see the Bridges bringing their kids in. It's almost like it's a different situation.
You're probably right now. In fact, that's a good observation. Today, the money is a lot bigger, and today the opportunities for instant fame are quite ready at hand. But in the old days, at least in my old days, that was during the Depression. And there were, well, for that matter, right now, even in the so-called good times economically, for show business anyway, at any given moment, as you know, most actors are out of work. I mean, you check the unions, and I forget the statistics, but something like 63% of all actors tonight are out of work. They may be working next week or whatever.
55,000 members to SAG in New York City. Those 55,000 members, fewer than 5% will earn $5,000 or more.
Yeah, it's scary. So that is the background of the reason why most entertainers, especially in the old days, said, no, my family wanted me to be a civil engineer. I swear to God, I don't think they ever knew what a civil engineer was.
I never met one who was
Maybe
civil
they just thought he was, right, they thought he was an engineer who was nice enough to be civil. But that's what they encouraged me to do. And in another instance, my Aunt Margaret Donahue, Aunt Mag as we called her, one day sat me down for about a minute and a half and gave me a little professional advice. I was about 16 at the time. She said, you know, Stevie, they all called me Steve, what I think you should do when you're looking for work later is get into the advertising business. And I said, oh, really, Aunt Mag, why? And now she was a bill collector for the American Express. People should pay their bills by mail, but a lot of them don't, so poor women and people, men, whatever, have to walk around and say, hey, you owe us money. So that's what she did for a living. She went to all the deadbeat companies in Chicago and pounded on their desk, and they gave her checks. So she said, I think you should get into advertising. I said, why? She said, because of all the offices and all the businesses I go to, they have the thickest rugs.
Oh.
And it meant something.
Yeah,
You know, there was luxury in those offices.
That's where the money was. My father always wanted me to be the mayor of New York City, and just think, if I had done that today, I'd be black. We'll be right back with more from Steve Allen.
No, Mort, hold on.
What?
We got I think somebody on line one.
Kalamazoo?
This is somebody else.
Hello.
Go ahead,
Hello.
line one.
Maybe it's the mayor.
Hello, line one. You're on the Downey Show.
Hello, is it Steve Allen there?
Is that who I think it is?
No, this is just a rug salesman here, and I wanted to come by your advertising agency and see if I could sell a couple of square jars.
Bill Dana, you son of a gun,
You son of a gun. And they think this is a surprise, Steve.
Well, it's...
I told them we were just together the other night and the night before that, and
Yes.
I guess they don't know about us.
Yeah, we had a wonderful camaraderie among all the old guys, Bill and Louie and Tom and Pat and all of us. We're all still social friends. We've always been fond of each other professionally and personally. So, Bill, I've had enough of you. I'll see you around.
Okay.
Zay,
I just want to tell anybody who sits still for it that they've got to watch that show. We were all blown away. All of these jaded folk there at the Beverly Hills Hotel looking at
The other night, yeah.
those redone kinescopes that they just held up so nice, and I loved every minute of watching and doing and being and having. And hello, Morton.
Hi, Bill. How are you?
I'm terrific.
Nice to talk to you, pal.
I'm doing
Where are you?
a guest shot on Lenny, and they're calling me on stage.
Oh, good.
Does that sound good?
Yes.
Great guy.
Tell Lenny I said hello.
Lenny Clark. Yeah, Lenny Clark. Funny man. Big fan of yours, Steve. Big fan of yours.
Thank you for that.
Morton Downey
Thank you.
Jr.
Thanks,
I gotta
Bill.
Get back to the rugs.
Thanks, pal. All right, we're going to be back with more from Steve Allen, so please stick around with us. Out of here.
Well, what's new in sports? I'll tell you what's new. The 1958 Ouch baseball season is getting underway with the annual... Good night, folks. Serious. That's it. The annual break. All right, here we go. Now...
Please stand by for an important message for all senior citizens.
In November of 1989, the Medicare catastrophic bill was repealed by Congress. Now, many seniors who have Medicare supplement insurance are confused about what their policy will or will not cover.
With the government making all these changes, I really don't know how good my coverage is.
I was shocked to find out that my rates went up and my benefits went down.
The Association of Retired Americans, a nonprofit organization for seniors, is making a Medicare supplement comparison available to anyone over age 64. You will receive your comparison with absolutely no cost or obligation.
We want to be sure that we're covered as well as we can be.
It's hard to keep up with all the changes in Medicare.
An ARA representative will explain how the repeal of the catastrophic bill affects your existing Medicare supplement policy and will compare your policy to others that are available today.
Finally, I'll be able to see if my policy is good or not.
If I can get better coverage and save money too, I want to know about it.
Eliminate the guesswork. Make sure you've got the proper coverage and that you're not paying too much for your coverage. For your comparison, we urge you to call the toll-free number on your screen. This is a service of the Association of Retired Americans. To get your comparison with absolutely no obligation, call now.
Call now, and I'll make sure you get your Medicare supplement comparison from the Association of Retired Americans. You owe it to yourself to find out if you've got the proper coverage. To get your comparison, all you need to do is call the toll-free number on your screen.
Steve Allen is our guest, and we have some folks giving us a call, so let's go to Kalamazoo, Michigan. Kalamazoo, you're on with Downey.
Hi, Mr. Downing.
Hi, where'd you get that voice?
From Kalamazoo, of course.
Well, of course.
Mr. Allen.
Yes.
How are you?
None of your business. I tell you, it'll be all over the central part of the country.
I have a question for you, sir.
All right.
You are an icon in the comedy business, and I have a question with the trend set that you have had. Why is it that we experience such, well, mediocre or less than comedy shows?
Well, I think you may be, although you sound young, you may have picked up the myth that everything was sensational in the 1950s. It's true, on the one side of the ledger, that that was a golden age for comedy.
Are you on the phone, Kalamazoo?
Yes.
Hang around for a while. We'll give you the answer after these messages.
All right.
All right.
You're watching CNBC.
This is how the roomy new Cutlass Supreme SL looks after traveling 300 highway miles on just 10 gallons of gas. And this is how Honda Accord looks after the same challenge. Well, if it hadn't run out of gas 20 miles back, you'd see that it's smaller and it's blue. And next trip, Dad, it's yours. Who says you can't get great gas mileage in a roomy, comfortable car? Cutlass Supreme is one car that does it all and does it right.
This is the new generation of old.
Get ready for the most powerful investment tool you'll ever use. Add Express to your personal computer, and you've got a 24-hour financial information service right in your home. Fast, accurate, easy to use. Express gives you an insider's view of what's going on whenever you want it. Take charge of your financial future with Express. Call Express now for a special introductory offer. 1-800-7PC-NEWS.
When your business day ends, get the story behind what moved the markets on Business View. CNBC's Sue Herrera and Dean Shepard are joined by a team of skilled reporters and expert guests from around the nation and around the globe, ready to bring you the top stories, the in-depth analysis, the insight. So after the bell rings downtown, tune in uptown. Business View every weeknight at 6:30 Eastern Time, only on CNBC. McLaughlin. People you know.
You don't tempt fate.
Answers you need.
And if the men in this country were real men...
McLaughlin makes a difference.
You're a working mother.
McLaughlin.
Will you, Bob Squire, continue to use it if it favors some candidate of yours? I work for my client.
I didn't know that. John McLaughlin. Tell me.
Every night at 10 p.m. Eastern Time on CNBC.
Oh, are you a waiter?
Yes, I am.
Uno. Ya Antigo Ome.
Ya Antigo Ome.
Yes, it's written right there.
That's Yankee go home.
Nice going, Gina.
Hey, how about this? Calamari a la Française. What is that?
That's a French fried octopus.
French fried octopus?
Ooh, I don't think I want that.
Well, you couldn't have it anyway, sweetheart. You are a party of 3, and we just sold the octopus to parties of 8. This way, each one gets a drumstick.
Everybody gets
Pat Harrington Jr., funny man. And Jane and Audrey, of course.
Yeah. Speaking of Jane and Audrey, Jackie Gleason. Yeah, that was a man that you admired.
Oh, the greatest.
Did he not rehearse his shows? I heard that he never rehearsed.
He rehearsed himself very little. There were rehearsals, and Aud had to go through them, and the other members of the cast, Art Carney and the others. But he would generally watch them on a monitor from his dressing room. Of course, he had a remarkable memory. He could read a script once, they say, and pick it up almost totally. Boy, would I love to have that. Wouldn't any actor love to have that? So he didn't really have to rehearse, and he knew what he wanted to do.
I used to hold the idiot cards on his show.
No kidding.
All right? And the cue cards in those days. And he would not do any of the skits, but he'd walk out and mark where he was going to be. So he knew where the other actors and participants were.
All comedians have their peculiarities of that sort. On our old show with the gang you've seen, we used to rehearse in double talk, but there was a practical reason for it. In other words, if the script said, hand me that knife, we would say, Clive me the peeve, because it had to be the same number of syllables so that our director wouldn't get his timings loused up. But the reason for that is I discovered the first few months we were getting screams in rehearsal from the band, from the ushers, from the advertising people, from people standing around friends. And then we would go on the air when we needed those laughs, and they didn't laugh then because they already laughed in the afternoon.
Oh, yeah.
So I said to our guys, hey, let's double talk it, and then we'll save those fresh laughs. That's one of the reasons you hear all those screams on the shows now.
We have some people in the audience, sir.
Yes, hi. I'd like to ask Mr. Allen what he thinks of the comedy of Andrew Dice Clay.
I wish Mr. Clay nothing but good health, but I deplore his comedy. I think it's far too vulgar.
Would you go for banning him or?
No, I go for killing him, but that's that's a shock laugh, and I'm shocked that you laughed at. But no, I'm not a censor, but I would hope we could shame him into cleaning his act up a little bit.
He's a pretty talented guy. Andrew Dice Clay's a pretty talented guy.
Yeah, I don't knock his talent.
Yeah. He really does not need to swim in the sewer to show that he can float.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't know if that makes sense to you.
But you know a fascinating thing? He can fill Madison Square Garden. Bob Hope cannot. Danny Thomas cannot. I cannot. Steve Martin cannot. A lot of big comics cannot do that.
Well,
so
you know, I think, I don't know if I'm thinking right here. Audience, if you want to get involved in this, please do. I think, unfortunately, we have a country today of a lot of illiterate youth.
Oh, yes.
Because they're not being taught properly in school.
Mm-hmm.
I think that illiterate youth has a very disposable income, big disposable income.
You're right.
I think that they therefore are the ones who buy the records. I think they therefore demand very little of the music and of the lyrics and everything.
Yeah.
And I think that has permeated itself right into the type of comedy. I mean, when you get records that talk about vital parts of a person's body.
Yeah, or violence, or, or
you know,
sexism, racism.
I think that's all part of of what's going on in our system.
You're absolutely right.
The falling apart of the system. That's that gentleman. Go ahead, sir. Stand up for Mr. Allen, right over here.
Steve,
or lie down. I don't care.
I
Yes.
was wondering, the old-time comics like Don Knotts and Tom Poston.
Yeah.
They always seem to act impromptu when they're on TV. And is this really their nature? They don't seem to have to work to be funny. They just seem to have a natural talent for it.
All those guys on our team were and are still naturally funny. Sometimes they are, if they're being interviewed on the sidewalk, they're obviously ad-libbing. The world doesn't give you a script when you get out of bed in the morning. But on our old show, that was all written and rehearsed.
Philadelphia, you're on Downey.
Hello.
How are you?
How you doing, Mort?
Good, pal.
I got a question for Steve about his music. I'm a big fan of jazz piano, and I'm wondering if he's still working on it or composing.
Oh, yeah. I just came in from Washington, D.C., where I played for a week at a top jazz club there called Anton's, and I'm doing a big band date with a bunch of big band jazz music. I wrote in a few nights in Los Angeles, and then I go right to another big band date in, near San Diego. So I've always loved jazz. I love to write it, love to perform it, always will.
The reason you and I ran into each other in a building in
LA
North Hollywood the other day
Yeah.
was you were looking for a studio to get to, and I was just coming from signing a contract with Esquire Records to do a new album.
Oh, great.
Because I love to write too, only I'm not nearly as good as you.
Fantastic.
It acts as a nice catharsis for me. So I have something coming out called, Hang Them by the Testicles Till They're Dead. No, I'm only teasing. It's going to be Morton Downey Jr., good old boy. Let's go to Detroit City.
Yeah, Mort?
How are you, babe?
Hey, this is Tony. I want to say hi to Steve Allen. I enjoyed his humor and comedy and piano playing and that for years, and I also enjoy your show.
How old are you, Tone?
Me, I'm 48 years old.
48 years old.
Yes, sir.
Do you still like the comedy of a Steve Allen, of a Don Knotts, of a Jackie Gleason? How about an Andrew Dice Clay or Sam Kinison?
No, I like the Steve Allen type humor better.
Do you get turned off by the Andrew Dice Clay and the Kinnisons?
Yeah, it's too far out.
See, I don't get turned off when they're nice.
Mm-hmm.
I get turned off when they go after women in the audience.
Yeah.
And a guy sitting with his woman, and he'll walk up and say, "Hello, sir, is this the first time you had a date with this girl?" "Yes." "Turn around, let me see." "Yes, your mouth." And they make defaming remarks about women.
Sure, and about racism.
I wonder what their mothers must think, or what their mothers are like.
You've said a key word. The two most important roles any of us are ever called upon to fill in our society, our world, are that of marriage partner or parent, and parent. The only two roles for which nobody's given any training. If you were at all lucky, you had a pretty fair role model. Where are the role models now? It's a racist question. Would you want your daughter to marry one? But think of this for a moment. Again, I hope Andrew Dice Clay has the greatest success and the greatest health. I got nothing against him personally. But would you want your daughter to marry a guy who seriously talks like Andrew Dice Clay?
I would
would.
probably break both of her legs so she couldn't walk down the aisle.
Yeah. So that says something. And would you want if you're 9 years old watching right now, would you want your daddy to talk all day like Andrew Dice Clay? These people are role models, whether they want to be or
Unfortunately,
not.
a lot of daddies and mommies do talk
Sure,
like Andrew Dice Clay.
and look what they're raising.
And that's why you end up with an Andrew Dice Clay.
Yeah.
Steve Allen, thank you.
Thank you, Mort.
For
Great to see you.
years of blessed kindness. Thank you. Folks, good night. We'll see you next day.
Come on, you idiot. Come on. Play a minute, piano, young fellow. All right, never mind. Here we go. I'm not much. Come on, you big goose. Sing here. Oh, stop all your silly laughing. All right, they did. My comeback. Here we go. Oh, come on here. Give a fellow a chance. All right. All right. I'm not much.
Big news from AT&T. Now you can get 1 free hour of high-quality AT&T long distance and enjoy special savings 24 hours a day. Just call this toll-free number and ask for the AT&T Reach Out America plan. Reach Out America gives you an additional 25% discount starting at 5 p.m. So you'll get the biggest discount during the best time to call. But that's just the beginning. The AT&T Reach Out America plan also gives you a 10% daytime discount.
Great.
Plus an hour of weekend and night calls. So you can call all across America for one low price.
Oh, my assistant just brought me a copy of the budget.
To order the AT&T Reach Out America plan, call 1-800-428-5678. You'll get a 25% discount off our already low prices from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. An hour of weekend and night calls, plus our daytime discount. It all adds up to savings 24 hours a day.
Hi, Grandma. Yes, I'm fine, and so is Harry.
And it costs just $8.70 a month. Order the AT&T Reach Out America plan now, and we'll give you 1 free hour of long distance plus a special $5 savings. To order, call 1-800-428-5678. Need another reason?
Entau, Maria. Queda de novo.
The plan also includes an international discount at no extra charge.
I'll be there tomorrow.
You can even get an option that lets you save on calls away from home. Call 1-800-428-5678 for your free hour. And save on quality AT&T long distance, day and night. AT&T, the right choice.
Coming up on Steals and Deals, kids love them, but parents hate them. Slap bracelets sweep the country, even as some schools ban the bans. Also, con artists set their sights on trusting senior citizens and rob them blind. And a nasty little box that's got the final word in getting even with your enemies.
Hello, everyone. I'm Janice Lieberman for Steals and Deals. We'll have those stories for you and more. But first, there's a phone war being fought right now over long-distance customers. And one of its battles has given us some new lingo, slamming. And consumers are the ones getting slammed. NBC's Betty Furness has more.
MCI says it now has 14% of the long-distance market. U.S. Sprint puts its share at 9%. And both companies are growing. AT&T says its share has been reduced to 64%, though its rivals say that's a deliberate undercount to appeal for special treatment.
Every time you turn on a TV, it seems AT&T is trying to keep you from switching to Sprint. Well,
the battle of the phone companies is being fought largely through a blitz of television commercials.
It's like, can you give me savings like MCI? Can you guarantee I'll be happy with my service like MCI?
I've been there.
and I came back to AT&T. And so why don't these other guys just give you a break, you know?
The phone companies are also using mail and sidewalk solicitation and, not surprisingly, phone calls to capture new customers. And therein lies the problem called slamming. Slamming is when a phone customer suddenly finds his long-distance service has been switched to another company without his knowledge or consent. Organizations such as the American Association of Retired Persons are pursuing the issue with some pretty strong language. Jim Thompson, the AARP's manager for consumer affairs.
The problem with this one is that the phone companies are just out and out lying. They're not deceiving somebody on the phone. They're saying that they're going to do one thing and they do something else.
The AARP has editorialized on slamming and urged people who feel victimized to write in, and people have, in great numbers.
In my opinion, what they are doing is stealing, causing a lot of aggravation, phone calls, and time wasted.
Long-distance companies need only your verbal agreement, nothing in writing, in order legally to tell your local phone company to switch you from one long-distance carrier to another. Here in New York, Catherine Turner says it's a total mystery how she was changed from AT&T to Sprint.
I said, I haven't spoke to anyone. I haven't signed anything. So I would like to know, how did you get my number and my name and my address?
How did you feel when you found you'd been switched?
I felt terrible.
At MCI headquarters in Washington, Executive Vice President Gene Eidenberg denies, as do all the companies, that any deliberate dishonesty is involved.
It can happen in a variety of ways, but I can assure you and people watching this program that it was not with the intent of this corporation.
In Kansas City, Steve Aiken of U.S. Sprint.
And we don't want any customers who do not choose us, because in the long run, that will cost us more money and will not be able to serve them in the way that they're satisfied with.
AT&T has both sued MCI and appealed to the Federal Communications Commission to require signed cards from customers before their service is changed. AT&T Vice President Merrill Tutton.
Our belief is a signed authorization card before the local telephone company actually changes your service from one company to another would allow the consumer to, think about what's happened, plus it would prevent this slamming.
Has AT&T been guilty of slamming, even unintentionally?
Intentionally, never. We have found one of two things has happened. Either someone else in the home chose to pick AT&T and the other person didn't know about it, or there has been a minor clerical error.
MCI and Sprint oppose any requirement for written authorization to change your service. Local phone companies say it would add unwanted cost, and the FCC says only that it's reviewing the record. However, a congressional subcommittee is looking into the matter, so there could be some movement on the issue. In the meantime, your best protection against being slammed is to know who you're talking to. Get a name and phone number so you can use it if you do have to complain. Well, many senior citizens are complaining about con artists. A recent study conducted by the American Association of Retired People found that Americans over the age of 65 are less skeptical than younger people and are therefore more likely to be ripped off by unscrupulous salespeople. According to the AARP study, if you're over the age of 65, chances are you're more trusting than the generations behind you.
It's like a physician, where people our generation will say, why do I need that procedure? Or that costs too much. An older person will tend to say, well, doctor, okay, because you said so, I'll do it. That translates into the marketplace and into sales transactions, and it's unhealthy. They need more skepticism.
Skepticism might have saved 82-year-old Harlan Nelson. A repairman told him his house needed a new roof and some paint repairs. The repairman took Harlan for a ride.
Oh, I lost $110,000. That's cash. That's all I had in one bank.
Phoenix was the site of a recent gathering of consumer experts from across the country, and one of their focus areas was scams targeting older Americans. Many con artists get money from senior citizens by convincing them to invest it. Their sales tactics often prey on the fears of this age group, fears that they won't be able to provide for a spouse, take care of medical bills, or maintain their current lifestyle. Scott Staff, an investor education advisor, urges any older person confronted with an investment opportunity to check for proper credentials.
Every person who sells an investment in the state in which a person resides has to come from a licensed firm and has to be licensed personally. If they're not licensed, and that could be a person in your state or calling over the phone line, you've got an immediate red flag of someone who's at least right there violating the law.
Experts also warn against buying anything over the phone. Get it in writing before making any decision. And if you decide to invest money in your later years, make sure you can afford a mistake. Gambling with a retirement nest egg is very risky business. Unfortunately, seniors can be taken by people they think are their friends. Many older people put their trust and their finances in the hands of the wrong people. Joining us now to talk more about seniors who lose their life savings is Sandy Weinberg. He's an estate lawyer who works with many children of older parents. Thanks for joining us, Mr. Weinberg.
Nice meeting you.
Can you tell us what the biggest mistake children make when it comes to finances with their parents?
Unfortunately, I think with our mobile society, a lot of children are geographically separated from their parents. A lot of parents live in Florida, their children up in the Northeast, and they're not aware of the day-to-day financial affairs of their parents. Particularly as one parent dies and they have a surviving parent, and that parent becomes much more dependent on caretakers to take care of their affairs. And as a result, they become much more isolated and more dependent on that caretaker. And as a result, what sometimes often occurs is that that caretaker has then, or has a financial interest in that person's affairs or property.
And what happens later on? They just find out, hey, what happened to all that money?
Basically, that's what our firm has found with many surprised children who come to find out afterwards that a lot of these monies that were supposed to pass through the estate were conveniently given to this particular person's friend for convenience purposes, but after the person dies, it turns out that they claim that it was a gift. And unless somebody is aware of their parents' finances on a routine and regular basis, a lot of these things become somewhat of a surprise to the family members.
Do the caretakers actually scheme to defraud these people?
No, I think that these people have genuinely good intentions to help their friends, but they come to quickly find out that there's very little access and communication that these elders have with their family members, and as the elders become more dependent on these caretakers, a nurse's aide or an attendant, they seem to find a unique opportunity. And there's confusion. I think they intend to befriend somebody and to help them in their time of need. But the issue of compensation is really never discussed between the person who's trying to give the aid and the recipient. And they come to confuse the issue as to who the money belongs to after the person dies.
Okay, what can you do if you do live out of state and your folks live someplace else? It's not easy to keep in touch with day-to-day finances. What can you do to ease your heart on this subject?
I think that the best solution is to, obviously, both for the elder and the family member, to both be much more involved and to communicate as to the details of each of the respective finances of the elder's portfolio. Additionally, I think it's probably important that a lot of the children go and visit their parents more often. I think that's a result of this.
Okay. Thank you very much for your help here, and it is an important issue and something you should think about before you get into trouble. Thank you, Sandy Weinberg, for joining us. And when we return to Steals and Deals, a bright new gimmick that kids are wild about has now been labeled a potential health hazard.
Watching CNBC.
In the independent J.D. Power & Associates initial quality survey, only one American car line ranks in the top 10. But then, quality has never been foreign to Buick. There are more than 1,400 refinements engineered into the new Buick Park Avenue Ultra. Come see it and start counting Park Avenue Ultra for $1991 from Buick, the new symbol for quality in America and beyond.
Does your sinus medicine put you to sleep? You need Sudafed Sinus with a non-aspirin pain reliever for sinus headaches, plus a decongestant for pressure that starts to work in as quick as 22 minutes without drowsiness. Sudafed Sinus. Fast relief, not fast asleep.
Now, this is what I hear, but not what I know.
What can one of America's foremost financial reporters do for you?
Give them the kind of information that the big institutional investors know. Tell them what they're buying, selling, thinking, and doing.
The Dorfman Report, weekdays on World Business, The Money Wheel, Market Wrap-Up, and Business View.
I always say if you buy takeover stocks on rumors, I think you're off your rocker.
Dan Dorfman, only on CNBC. McLaughlin. People you know.
You don't tempt fate.
Answers you need.
And if the men in this country were real men...
McLaughlin makes a difference.
You're a working mother.
McLaughlin.
Will you, Bob Squire, continue to use it if it favors some candidate of yours?
I work for my client.
I didn't know that. John McLaughlin. Tell him.
You mean McLaughlin?
Every night at 10 p.m. Eastern Time on CNBC.
To you, drugs are pleasure. To your baby, they're poison. A message from the March of Dimes.
One of the hottest playground fads in years has just become a target of a health warning. Your kids probably know all about them. They're called slap bracelets, and they've just been banned from some schools in New York State. Jane Hansen of WNBC TV has more on that story.
Children at Colonial Elementary in Pelham and neighboring Seminoy School are leaving one of their newest fads at home. Why?
Our principal, Mr. Longobardi, said that they could be dangerous and we weren't supposed to wear them anymore.
Did that bother you when the principal said you can't bring them to school anymore?
Not really.
What they're talking about are these slap bracelets, colorful 9-inch strips of covered metal which wrap around the wrist after a slap on the